Okay, so getting down to business. So we have an opening reading, number 645 in our hymnal, which I copied on the paper. So this is a responsive reading. So I read.
One second, Mindy. Karen, can you spotlight, because right now it's just going to be a video of you from Mindy's talk. Can you spotlight the Faith+Works account?
I thought she was.
I think you spotlighted you.
You look great.
That was pinned.
No, it should be spot, because pin just does it on your screen.
Okay.
Spotlight is
Really?
for everyone.
I didn't know that.
Speaker.
Maybe it can't because
You want to make Doug the host and he can worry about those things, Karen?
He is co-host.
yeah, but I can't. Maybe you can't do it when there's only two people.
But you can.
There you go.
But maybe I just pinned it. Hopefully it just records us. But if you turn your camera off, Karen, then hopefully that will just ensure that we get the right image recorded.
Oh, look at that.
Hopefully that will work.
Okay. So, welcome everybody. So glad you're here. It's been a busy weekend. And so I wanted to start with this opening reading, number 645 from the hymnal, which I copied on the paper. So this is a responsive reading. So I read the part in the regular text, and then you read the part in italics, okay? It's kind of choral reading, which we're good at. Okay, afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me.
Henceforth I ask not good fortune, I myself am good fortune. Strong and content I travel the open road.
I inhale great draughts of space, the east and the west are mine, and the north and south are mine.
All seems beautiful to me. I can repeat over to men and women, you have done such good to me, I would do the same to you.
Whoever you are, come travel with me. However sweet these laid up stores, however convenient this dwelling, we cannot remain here.
However sheltered this port, and however calm these waters, we must not anchor here.
Together, the inducement shall be greater. We shall sail pathless and wild seas.
We will go where winds blow, waves dash, and the Yankee clippers speed by under full sail.
Forward, after the great companions, and belong to them. They too are on the road.
Onward to that which is endless, as it was beginningless, to undergo much, tramps of days, rest of night.
To see nothing anywhere but what you may reach it and pass it, to look up or down no road but stretches and waits for you.
To know the universe itself as a road, as many roads, as roads for traveling souls.
Great. Thank you so much for reading with me.
If anybody joins, the order of services has been dropped in chat.
You know, if they join, they can't see the chat from before.
Oh, well, I can drop it again.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's a tricky thing, because you always feel like you dropped it in the chat, done, but it's not.
Never done.
So you can talk about somebody behind their back, because if they join late, they don't know.
Yeah, but you never know. Sometimes they could download the chat. Don't talk about anyone behind their back.
Oh, no, this is, the chat is downloaded.
Yes, you gotta be careful.
But if you download the chat, can you see the chat before you got there?
You can't, but the,
I don't know.
the administrator.
Don't talk about people in the chat.
I'm not
Don't
gonna
talk about people on email. Only talk about people like this.
Yeah.
Don't even do that.
Don't even do that. Don't talk about anybody. Okay, here's what I want to talk about today. It's called The Potter's Wheel. I'm going to tell you a story. This is the Zen story that Michael Lally told me. So Michael Lally is a famous poet. He's a good friend of mine. And he studied religion and Zen and he knows all kinds of things. And his older brother was a Jesuit minister who served in Japan. So we went over to Japan a number of times. So he knew a lot. He's been to Asia a lot, knows a lot about it, and was an Asian studies minor in college. So went to college after he served in the military on the GI Bill. And so he went to the University of Iowa and went to the Iowa Writers Workshop program. That's where he learned how to write and how, improved his skills as a poet, although he was a poet before that. So he told me this story. He said there was a period of several hundred years when Korea was shut off to Japan. No visiting. He said that the Japanese prized a particular kind of Korean pottery, which they couldn't get during that period. So the Japanese established an academy to try to make copies, to try to make this pottery on their own, but they couldn't get it. So then when relations were reopened, the academy sent a delegation to Korea to learn the secret. And they found out that the Korean potters made their wheels by eyeballing, they didn't measure, and none of them was even. So that's a deep story, right? So I have a Zen story for you. That's the Zen story. So, many meanings to a Zen story. You never actually really finish thinking about it. But for me, because I fell in love with Korean dramas, K-dramas, and have been studying them in the United States, but I'm going to go to Korea. It also had that, like, I'm trying to understand everything about Korea from my living room in New Jersey. But then when I go there, it's going to be the real thing, right? It's going to be the real wheel from which these things are made. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think now, because it's kind of like you put, it's always helpful to put a marker and say, this is, as of today, this is what I think. Because then I'll go to Korea, and when you go into a strange place, I find you get hit. Like you walk in, you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this, because the image that you make in your mind is actually never terribly close. Even if you're just going to, like, someplace in New Jersey I've never been before. I've never been to Cape May. I have a lot of ideas about Cape May. If I went to Cape May, it wouldn't be like my ideas. I'm thinking old Victorian houses and this and that and the ocean, but what would it really be like? It would be different. So and there's a moment when you enter this place where the thing that's really different from your idea hits you, and you're very aware of it. That's a very important moment. But it's also important to say, like, this is what I thought all by myself. So I decided, as you know, I fell in love with K-drama, and I fell in love with it because it's very interested in character and what happens to character. They have 16 hours of storytelling. And in that storytelling, they really want you to know some things about people, like a person. They want you to see, how they hold their hands, how they walk, how they hold their body, how they are in different kinds of situations. And all of this is very, very accurate for character. Come on in, please. It's good to see you. Have a seat. So they're not just, as you might say, they're not just whistling Dixie, right? They're really saying that this is how this person acts. There's I'm talking about K-drama. If there's a K-drama that's been very popular called The Extraordinary Attorney Woo, and it's about a woman who has autism spectrum disorder and who is a lawyer. Well, what's interesting about it is that the actress, constantly holds herself in postures like the way she walks down the street or kinds of clothes she wears to embody this character. That woman is also the star of another K-drama called The King's Affection, which is a historic drama about a young woman who's a twin. Her brother, who's the crown prince, is murdered, and she takes his place. So she's a young woman pretending to be a young man. But everything about the character is completely different. So it's the same actress playing this, pretending to be this boy, and the same actress playing somebody who has autism spectrum disorder. So how do you do that? And that's where, they're very interested in, if you're pretending to be a prince, how would you hold your body? If you're pretending to be an autistic woman, how would you hold your body? How would you speak? Well, speech is really different. She's much higher voice, the autistic attorney, than the pretending to be a young man. So But this extends to how would they think and how would they act in particular situations. So it's very respectful and very interested in character. And it's very interested in the problems of that people have tragedies in their lives and that those tragedies are following them, and their parents have tragedies. There's a lot of tragedy. And this is partly because there's been a lot of tragedy in Korea. So over many thousands of years, Korea has been 800 times. And perhaps the most serious was the invasion of Korea by the Japanese in 1910, where they colonized Korea until the end of World War II and were extremely brutal, really tried to destroy Korean culture, Korean language. So that was a very, very brutal experience of occupation. And then there was the Korean War, and then really the division into kind of what you might call socialist dictatorship and capitalist dictatorship, like literally dictatorship on both sides, but with slightly different ways of being organized. And then the emergence of South Korea now as this economic powerhouse. That's a lot of stuff. So I think the figure is that about a third of buildings were destroyed in Korea during the Korean War, and many people killed. So it was a huge tragedy, affected everybody. But then also going from being literally one of the poorest countries on earth to being the 13th largest economy in the world from between 1945 and now meant that people basically lifted the country out of poverty by concerted effort. It's quite extraordinary. For some reason, it reminds me of one of the peace marches that we went on in Washington, where there were all these yippies, and Abby Hoffman was leading this group that was going to levitate the Pentagon. And there's a certain point in the march where if you were going to go levitate the Pentagon, well, those people broke off to go levitate the Pentagon. And for some reason, the idea of the Korean people levitating their nation, it just reminds me of that. Like, I mean, it just brings back that image of where I was on this bridge where we were marching and they were going to go levitate the Pentagon. But anyway, the Korean people actually did levitate their country from really literally one of the poorest countries on earth, where everybody had thatched roofs and no indoor plumbing, to where they are now. So, so in these stories in K-drama, everybody's, orphaned, or, there's all these kinds of, I mean, it depends when the era of the story, but there's lots of war and treason and abandonment and orphaning. So people have these very painful things in their stories. And the authors are very clear that if you've had trauma, you can get easily trapped in how you're managing the trauma. You get trapped. So you're not moving on in your life, you're just trying to hold it together. And this is, then you move into some situation in life where that as a strategy just doesn't work. So then what do you do? And that's typically because there's some issue that's just bigger. It's bigger than you are, bigger than this very tight pattern of behavior that you've developed from your trauma. So breaking through that is a huge part of what these stories are about. And then so that's all just fascinating. Like, what does trauma do to people? I mean, watching their depictions of this is the trauma, and this is what the person has done with it. Very satisfying for me as a psychiatrist, a little bit like a busman's holiday. But then the really interesting, even more interesting part is that once they break through, they don't just sit by themselves. Once they break through, they join with a group of people and work together as a team. There's kind of, it's an ensemble. So some shows are like ensemble shows, like, Magnificent Seven is an ensemble. But this is sort of like you have this first period of getting out of the traumatic defenses. Then there's the assembling of the ensemble that then solves the problem. And the problems are often problems that are serious problems in the growth and development of Korea, like the oppression of women. There's pretty much a theme in every K-drama is the terrible experiences of women. So, for example, there's a show where a woman who's been home raising her child has to re-enter the workforce because she's gotten divorced. She isn't getting any alimony. And she's a highly skilled technical worker, but the only job she can find is being an attendant at a sauna or being a clerk in a grocery store. I mean, she's just shut out of the workforce. So, and she's in such despair about this that then she has one of those really, really terrible, horrible, very bad days. So she and her ex-husband had lost their home, but it was getting ready to be demolished, so it was standing abandoned. So she was camping out in the house. But the house, she wakes up and they're actually demolishing the house. She has to run out. Then she loses a shoe. It was like ridiculous accident, but she loses a shoe. She only has one shoe, so she's supposed to go to a job interview, but she can't go to a job interview with one shoe. Then it starts to rain, but she doesn't have enough money to buy an umbrella. So she is standing in the rain with an umbrella, no shoes, no job, no home. And her best friend calls her up and says, "Where are you?" And she says, "I'm at the edge of my life." So it's that moment that interests them so much, that moment at the edge. You're at the edge of your life. What happens next? And I think that alcoholism is very high in South Korea and suicide is very high. I think they really, as part of this is propaganda. Like, you can be at the edge of your life and something will happen next and it will start to get better. So this is very much about you're at that moment, but something happens. And then what does that mean for you and how do you make something of that? So, and then, this whole idea that you then join a group and the group works together. This is very different from our hero stories. If you think about superhero stories, like the superheroes might have a group, but the rest of us don't have a group, right? We're all like Lois Lane, like, Superman, come save me. But this is not Superman stories. This is super group. So it's a collectivist society, and they have a lot of this is how you operate in a group. So that's also fascinating. So from thinking about this, I would say that really there's an underlying message here. Like, they don't come right out and say this, but I would say that what I've come to believe after 2 years of studying this is that really what they're trying to say is this is how you survive. Like, there are these terrible moments, like there are horrible things that happen, but this is how you survive. And so it's 3 parts. First, that survival is trauma informed. So when I was a young psychiatrist, trauma was just really being acknowledged in psychiatry. Prior to that, we didn't really acknowledge it. But at that point, there were so many Vietnam War veterans who were traumatized and had very chronic PTSD that we had to care for. And the women's movement was bringing the problems of rape and incest and domestic violence to the fore. So there was a whole new, really reassessment of the role of trauma in life. It had been very isolated, like if you go to war, you get trauma. But the whole idea that, no, there's trauma everywhere. And this has expanded consistently since then. So now we talk about adverse childhood experiences, which are all kinds of terrible things, all the terrible things that are in K-drama. So the idea that you're trauma informed is very important now in all social services. And in education and many parts of life, that people have traumas and you have to handle it with respect. There's one of the K-dramas is called Just Between Lovers, and it starts with 4 young people who are in a mall, and the mall collapses. 2 of them are killed outright, and 2 of them survive. One of them gets out pretty early. She's rescued pretty early, has amnesia. The other one, a young man, is the last person to be rescued and has horrible PTSD. He's absolutely tortured by the images, by what it was like, because he was in that collapse for 7 days. And he was near the body of one of the young people who died. So he's completely haunted by that young man. So he pops pills to try to manage this and basically destroys his liver. So the sort of, what do you do with that is very heavy. But they're willing to really look at trauma of that magnitude in a way of saying, you had that kind of trauma, how do you survive? This is how we're going to show you how. So that's the first part. The second thing is that what they say, what they show you, is that trauma is alleviated by enlightenment. And that, of course, is, I think, very, very important for us as Unitarian Universalists and friends. Sort of, what is enlightenment? So they don't mean that somebody goes to a monastery and sits in, meditation for hours and hours. That's not what they mean. And so going back to the story of the woman who was at the edge of her life, and she's lost her shoe. When she lost her shoe, she threw out her other shoe. She was like, what is good as one shoe? So she threw it away. So she's standing barefoot in the rain, and a guy comes by, and he says, I notice you don't have any shoes. I happen to have some shoes. And he puts them on her, and he says they fit perfectly. And she says, yes, they're my shoes. Then he tells her the story of how he found her shoes. But I think that in these stories, that sort of miracle that somebody found your shoes and your shoes were restored to you. So you might not have a house, you might not have any money, you might not have a job, but you do have shoes again. And then she goes to her friend's house, and he's like, lets her stay there. One thing leads to another. But without that moment, she couldn't breathe. So it's this, what I think we would call grace, that there is grace, that in accepting grace is how we begin to be on the path of enlightenment, of what does it mean to be a good member of society and to be in relationship. These are people who are out of relationship to be brought back into relationship. So one of the things is that this, of course, is very important because, so Dr. Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, studied Asian philosophy, and he treated a number of people with alcoholism, but the psychoanalytic treatments didn't work. So the founder of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, wrote to him and said, is there anything that can be done? And he said, well, I have observed that some people who have a vital spiritual experience can recover. And so what they're showing, I think, fits in this category of vital spiritual experience, that this moment where the universe lets up a little bit to see that there's a path forward. So this is not a trivial thing in the world. The founding of AA is considered one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century, and it saved the lives of millions and millions and millions of people. Plus, it spun off, Gamblers Anonymous and Sex Addicts Anonymous, all these things. So it's helped many, many people. But it all hinges on just such a moment as that woman has when she gets her shoes back. It's just a moment like that. So then the third part is that the enlightened person can join what I call an empowered collaboration. So I had observed when I first started studying the psychology of place, almost 40 years ago, 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, that there were a small number of remarkable stories of people who were in some kind of dire situation and worked together to make things better. So, and there were two of these that were weirdly parallel. So one was about Israeli soldiers who were captured by Egypt and put in prison in Egypt during the 1967 war. And they were in prison, they were in one room, a bunch of guys. And the other was African-American Navy men who were chosen to be considered to be the first Black naval officers during World War II. And they too were put in a room. So there you have these bunch of guys in one room. And so what's weird about these, so these were oral histories collected retrospectively from these men, but what was weird about the stories is that there are moments when you could take the paragraph from one oral history and put it in the other, and you could switch, and nobody would have ever known. Because the sort of early trauma, the kind of forming, storming, norming, performing that they went through is very parallel, as it has been in our experience with trying to form the People's CDC. But then the thing is that they, having figured out how to be a group together and how to be collaborative, very horizontal groups that get organized. They're in the army, but in the armed forces, but they reject the hierarchy. They say, no, that's not going to work here. We're just all equal. And then what they accomplish in the first case is that in the first case with the African-American men, there are 16 men, 13 of whom make it to be the first Black naval officers in the United States during World War II. In the other case, they all stay alive in the prison, and they do a whole long list of things, among which is that they translate the Hobbit into Hebrew, and it becomes the actual official translation of the Hobbit that's published in Hebrew. And they also they do like a weird number of amazing things. None of them was retrospectively diagnosed with PTSD. So although they're in a traumatic and high-risk situation, they take care of each other, and they're able to accomplish rather miraculous things. So this empowered collaboration is incredibly important to their stories, and not something we have in our stories. That you aren't just becoming enlightened in order to, like I'm enlightened, but I'm enlightened in order to be a better member of society. And when I'm a better member of society, society can be better. And I think that, much of the work that we are trying to do in our Cleveland Street Partnership really draws on this capacity of, if you have a little bit of enlightenment, you can work with a group and try to make the world better. So there's a show called Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha. And it's about a dentist who's having a horrible time in Seoul. And so she gets fired, she's mad, so she decides to set up a dental office in a small town, small fishing village. And so the first Saturday she's there was a knock on her door, and it's time to clean up the neighborhood. And she's like, oh, I'm really tired, I'll come next week. And the handsome hero says, no, we live in a society, here's your vest. So she's dragged kicking and screaming into the idea that she lives in a society. She's acting out in all kinds of ways, and the village keeps setting limits with her. But by the end of the show, she gets offered a big position in Seoul, so she could go back to Seoul and triumph. And she says, no, I'm going to stay here because this place needs a dentist, because I love playing with the children and their hedgehog. I have a role here. And I like going to clean up the village every Saturday. I have work to do here. So, and in fact, she and the handsome hero, of course, were getting married at the end. And in Korea, you go and take wedding photos before the wedding. So they're in the middle of taking their wedding photos. So they're both all dressed up. They were great outside taking their wedding photos, and their phones ring. And he's needed to fix some plumbing, and she's needed to fix somebody's tooth, and they go running off in the middle of taking their wedding photos to help other people. It's a very dramatic moment, but that's really the why are you enlightened? Because then you can be helpful. And apparently the Buddhism that went to Korea was a Buddhism that really focused on the idea that the enlightened person is of service to the society. Enlightenment is not for yourself, enlightenment is to help others. In the Maricela Gomez, who has spoken to our Faith+Works, says that in the Bodhisattva vows, the Bodhisattva vows are, I will not cross over to the other side until everyone has crossed over. So, so that's the path of K-drama and how the shows work. And obviously much more complicated than that, because they have 16 hours and they have I have to keep you watching for 16 hours. They have a lot of subplots. They have beautiful people, beautiful food, it's very intense. But that's basically how I read what's happening. I mean, as a psychiatrist. So, but I want to read you this this thing from Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan father who runs the Center for Action and Contemplation. And he said that the prophets insist the future is highly contingent on the now. They always announce to the people of Israel that they have to make a decision now. You can go this way and the outcome of events will undo you, or you can return to God, to love, and to the covenant. He says that's not predicting the future as much as it's naming the now, the way reality works. The prophet opens up human freedom by daring to tell the people of Israel that they can change history by changing themselves. That's extraordinary, and it's just as true for us today. So what I found so useful about that thought is that watching K-drama and watching this careful look at how a person goes from being really dysfunctional and unhappy and miserable to being on solid ground and a productive member of society. And also the way in part of that, it says, and this thing and that thing and the other thing in our society are in the way of people, and that's what they're taking on. So it's a very progressive moment in K-drama. So it feels to me that K-drama takes us very carefully through the now, present of a set of people. We're very in the present. We're watching the story unfold. It's not a story it's like we're watching it. And that the way in which they're showing us the now is to show us what grace is like and what enlightenment is like, and then how you move into a group so that these are tools that we could take into our own now and to use towards our own problem. And that this path out of pain and out of misery is a transformative path. But what I want to say is that it feels subversive, and what I think is subversive about it is that it's in the now. It's not in the distant future, it's not in the distant past, it's in the now. That we get to make choices. So what I want to say, and the reason I wanted to start with Walt Whitman and getting on the road, is that I'm going to go to Korea in February, stay there for 3 months. I'm going to see whatever I see. And so these are my speculations, but I don't know, these are my speculations about K-drama, which I have seen. I don't know anything about Korea, but Korea is the potter's wheel. And I just want to see what the wheel is like. So I then wanted to, in our second reading, Mary Oliver tells us, each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning. So the second reading, which you have on your order of service. Back page. Thanks, Molly. So this is a responsive reading, Marcial. So I'll read the regular part and then the italics. You guys will read. Every morning the world is created.
Under the orange sticks of the sun, the pink ashes of the night turn into leaves again.
And fasten themselves to the high branches, and the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies.
If it is your nature to be happy, you will swim away along the soft trails for hours, your imagination alighting everywhere.
And if your spirit carries within it the thorn that is heavier than lead, if it's all you can do to keep on trudging,
there is still somewhere deep within you a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted.
Each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning.
Whether or not you have ever dared to be happy, whether or not you have ever dared to pray.
The end. Thanks for listening.
Is that it? Should we have one person that signed on,
It's Margot, I think.
Margot.
Oh, hey, Margot.
But she's on mute.
Hi. Well, hello. I'm so good. So good to hear you, Mindy. I couldn't log in visually, so I'm here. I'm listening. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Really grateful.
Thank you. Beautiful.
one of the things that you said is the drama of war and how people probably, even those who have not gone to war, still probably be part of that drama. But in recent, probably now in the era that we're living as far as the pandemic, kind of the trauma, we have a lot, should we expect a lot of trauma from this really earth-shattering pandemic? As a psychiatrist, do we expect that? Is it something latent? Is it something that we're experiencing now, or will probably in a few years or coming years feel the trauma of all this, what's going on?
Well, we're already, rates of mental illness have skyrocketed. So we're already experiencing it. Psychiatrists, all the mental health professionals are working as hard as they can, and they can't keep up with the demand. And we have a very narrow kind of mental health system. So we only have clinical services for a small number of problems. We don't have kind of what I like to talk about is collective recovery. We have never developed those modalities. So when there's a upheaval on this scale, we don't have any tools for responding. So we're in a very dire situation without the tools that we need, but we're already in it. People are already reeling from what's happened. So, the thing about where does it go from here is it could take any number of paths, but we're a very divided society, and there's a lot of hatred in this society. So the odds that it will take a path that involves the open expression of aggression and hatred is very high. Highly traumatized people can act out with rage, and especially if they already hate each other and are divided. So that's what I think. I mean, we don't know where it'll go, but so the great social psychiatrists of several generations ago who were working around the time of World War II emphasized that it could go to dictatorship when you have this kind of a situation, but it could also go to spiritual revival. So people could come to understand and take in this kind of message of enlightenment that Korea is sharing with us. So there is another way to survive, which is what they're showing. It doesn't have to be war and hatred.
That is deep.
It is. It's hard, right? It's hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah. Is that it? Anybody else have anything to say?
How about you, Margot? You always have good things to say.
I just appreciated hearing you and what beautiful message you presented in this. I mean, the idea, the whole situation of finding enlightenment through, helping others, and really being in the now. And through the now, I think, something comes if we can stay in the present and sit and have the patience to just sit with whatever it is, and the patience to do that after something presents itself. I think that's really important, but and it's an important lesson, but we don't really get that experience. Idea is that you have to always be doing something, and in the doing and the rushing to do something, things tend to get worse. They can get worse. I don't know. I think that there is, through faith of just being with your situation, it really, something presents itself after after a bit. I have faith that happens, and that for me is a part of is enlightenment. That would be, having the ability to just be still and sit with something.
I
What I've
think
got to say.
that was great. And the enlightenment is the actual seeing. Like Mary Oliver says, the lilies are there every morning, but we don't see them every morning. If you're depressed or you're angry or upset, you're not going to see the lilies. So the enlightenment grace is that one morning you walk out and you're like, oh, I see the lilies. And then
That's right.
if you can have that moment of not only the joy of the lilies, but the gratitude for the lilies, then you can breathe and you can keep going on your path in a different way.
Yes, yes, yes. Just in that, I mean, just judging from my own experience, there's a difference if you can not be carried through, carried away with your depression, with your anger, with whatever it is. I mean, I've seen the difference. It's very difficult to do and not let yourself be carried away, but the practice of it is really worth it.
Thank you, Margot.
Thank you, Mindy. It's beautiful.
I have two questions about empowered collaboration from the examples you shared. The first, this is just a part of one of the stories you shared, is why with the black naval officers trapped in a room, but maybe they just all had to live in one room. But second, it seemed like the case you're making is that the people who participated in were a part of a situation of empowered collaboration, were able to weather very challenging events, but experience less trauma. What advice do you have for people trying to cultivate those conditions?
The black naval officers weren't trapped. Margot, I think you have to mute your phone.
Okay.
The black naval officers weren't trapped in a room, but they were all in the room. So they like all were staying in one room, and so they were doing all these things together. Can I just tell you one story about one guy?
Yeah.
I mean, there were really some remarkable characters, but one guy gets invited to play badminton with one of the commanding officers, and he's never played badminton before. So he quickly reads a book on how to play badminton, and he goes and plays badminton. Really remarkable people. But they helped each other. Like some guy knew math, and some guy knew this, and some guy knew that, and they figured out a system. And why say the second part of your question again, just so I answer it precisely?
Sure. So I guess it's first of all, is it your take that being a part of a group that's able to have empowered collaboration is able to face these challenges and come out the other side with less trauma? And how does one cultivate those conditions, or what are key characteristics of such a group? I guess that was 2 questions to 3.
Okay. But it's really important questions. So I think any group can cultivate empowered collaboration. What is empowered collaboration? What I meant by that term, what empowered the people, was actually that they took stock of what they have. It's actually very parallel to asset-based community development. It's like start with what you have. So the Israeli guys, I mean, they were in one room. They were being supported by Red Cross, so they could get packages from Israel over time. But there was there's sort of a long period before all that gets in motion. So what did they have in the room? They had one book, I think it's 9 guys. Anyway, they have one book and 9 guys, so they read out loud to each other, like that. So it's taking stock. This is what we have, and they couldn't get out. They were in prison, and they had all been tortured. So, and it was a dire situation. So it's sort of, what have we got? And then how can we use that? And part of what you have is the human capital of the group. And then there's also the physical capital. One of the things that they did, a couple of them were engineers. They invented a way to make a shower with a bicycle and heat the water so they could get a hot shower. And one day, the mayor of Cairo came by to see them and was riding the bicycle and thereby heating the water for the shower for the Israeli prisoners, which they thought was very fun. Anyway, so sort of, it's unleashing the creativity. Sort of, we are what we have. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And saying, yeah, okay, if we're the ones we've been waiting for, what do we got? That's that moment when you empty out your pockets. I got 5 cents, what do you got? It was when I was a kid, after high school, we'd go down to Toast of the Town Pizzeria, which had really great pizza, and everybody would be emptying out their pockets. Do we have enough for a pie? It's like that. That's empowered collaboration. Then the issue of, what does the group do? I mean, the group does what it thinks is best. So it's the collaboration, the working together.
Sort of like the biblical story of loaves and the fishes.
Yes.
Nobody had enough to feed everybody, but everybody had enough to feed everybody. So there was enough food. It wasn't a miracle. At least I don't believe it was a miracle. I believe it was collaboration.
Yeah. And Jesus, by just believing in people, empowered them, helped them empower themselves to eat together. I agree. So then, so Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's like, the grand visionary philosopher of Unitarian Universalism, believed there was what he called an oversoul, whatever. It was sort of things bigger than ourselves. But he wasn't really into like, didn't think Jesus was Son of God. He thought that was saying Jesus was Son of God was distorting what he had accomplished by having this faith in people. But the oversoul, as I think about it, is touched by when we collaborate together, we liberate an energy that is bigger than the sum of us. So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's partly what becomes protective of the group. If you think about how often we said when we were doing 400 Years of Inequality, that working together helped us get through that very difficult period, it's that. And it wasn't that any of us could have felt better by ourselves. We only felt better because we met every week and we worked together. That was an empowered collaboration. But Grant Club is an empowered collaboration. We get together every week and we work on something impossible, which is we're in a shabby building in a shabby town. How do we raise money?
About having less trauma because of that. I remember having the same memories in 2016, 2017, but Grand Club was like everywhere I looked, everyone was hysterical about the situation with Trump. We weren't hysterical in Grand Club, though. It was there was much less of that kind of distraction.
And we didn't have any solution. I mean, we didn't know that down the road we would bump into Jamie Bennett, who would get us money. But we just kept working every week. And if we raised $10,000, we were happy, and we just kept working. And partly because we would bring donuts,
Taking stock of what you've got.
we would, right? And then have a Christmas party and exchange books. It wasn't anything fabulous. It wasn't anything that's beyond the reach of people to do for themselves. It's sort of, but it's the constant care.
Seems like it's not that you're going to win every time, but there is a belief, there's this sense of, if I believe in something, then I stand for it, I'm standing up for it, and putting that voice out there that at least I'm belonging to certain groups, and I'm doing something positive to some extent.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
I'm going to win every time. Make your voice heard. But you said something that connected me back probably to something right now, that the Japanese occupation of Korea from 1910 on, and how after the left, how Korea was considered to be one of the poorest countries and so on and so forth, and that harkens me back to the moment right now in Haiti, how we are seeing how it is, the poorest and everything. So giving me hope probably that through that how they levitate, we can levitate too, and to empower everyone, and then change probably in the future, in 20 years, 10 years, 50 years, the way we are perceived now to later on with what it takes, so.
I think you
that's-
could
it's a lot
levitate,
of hope.
I think you can levitate Haiti.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely, the hope is there and seeing other situations,
Yeah.
but then saying like the work that has to be done from outside of Haiti and in Haiti.
Yeah,
And so on and so
exactly.
forth, so those
Well, I
stories
think-
give you hope.
I think that's the point of those stories, is to give us hope.
Mhm.
And I think that's why they're so popular around the world. Now, everybody is really obsessed with how cute the movie stars are and do they like the story, and people will debate endlessly. I didn't like that one, I like this one. But that's not the point. The point is that they're stories of how people emerge from being trapped in their own trauma to become part of a group, and that group can be effective.
Mhm.
That's the point of the story. So that brings us all hope, I think. All around the world. Which is why they're so popular all around the world. I think we 5 are the only people that know that.
And Margot.
And Margot, yeah. Hi, Margot. Bye, Margot. Okay, is that a good place to stop?
I
It's
think that-
2:57.
Yeah,
Yes,
that
I
was
think that's a good
wonderful.
place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Did you make this Mary Oliver poem? What's it called?
Responsive
Antiphonal or
reading.
responsive? Or
No,
was
it's
it
from
really
the
that?
hymnal.
Ah, okay.